I'd like to now introduce our second panel of the morning, which will focus on the mobility of the research community, and we'll also pick up some of the themes we discussed yesterday, specifically around capacity building and collaboration in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic, and looking a little bit at how we're exploring shifts in the norms of the very norms of scientific research and collaboration. To moderate the next session, I'd like to introduce Laurent Brizzi, professor at the University of Poitiers. He's a specialist in fluid mechanics and aeroacoustics, and specifically works on issues related to the noise, transportation, and energy production. Since 2016, he's also served as the vice rector of the University of Poitiers in charge of facilities and sustainability development. And since 2020, he's also been in charge of campus life. So I'd like to pass it off now to Laurent, and he will introduce all of the panelists, and we will continue the discussions. Thank you.
It's a great pleasure for me to share this session dedicated to the mobility and the COVID-19. So the main objective of this session is, in fact, to explore how the COVID-19 pandemic has shifted the norms of scientific research and collaboration. For many years, the research community has traveled extensively to conduct its scientific projects. Field work as well as collaborative programs require a short or long-term journey. International or national collaboration require teamwork, knowledge sharing, and also fruitful interactions, which very often involve traveling. Every year, in field, all fields combined, thousands of congresses and symposia are held around the world. These events are crucial for the exchange of ideas and the creations of the knowledge. However, through the business travel generated by these interactions, the scientific community participates to the global warming. For example, transatlantic flights from Paris to New York, for example, it's about 2.2 tons of carbon dioxide. So it's huge. March 2020 was a major quake for the scientific community, with a sudden stop of business travel due to the border closures. For example, 70% of commercial flights were cancelled all around the world into 2 weeks only. After a phase of massive cancellations of the scientific events, the community bounced back, and gradually many events turned to a virtual mode using massively internet tools like today. In this new mode of actions allow us to modify our way to communicate or exchange by allowing a certain democratization of exchanges. Thus, it was possible to participate to a symposium on Monday morning in Tokyo, and to follow another one in the afternoon in New York while being in Europe. Another advantage is the increase of the accessibility, particularly for the researchers who have little financial means, since the cost of an internet connection or device is much lower than a journey on the other side of the country or of the planet. But this mode of communication is not without disadvantages. It is clear that the physical contact is essential. Indeed, it's difficult to do common experience at a distance. Moreover, the cost for the planet is not null. We know that the digital tools have a certain carbon footprint. So the main objective of this session is to share our experiences and our best practices in this area in order to sustainably modify our scientific exchange and cooperations. So to do this, we have 4 speakers today. We will present in a few minutes actions or tools implemented on both sides of the Atlantic. So let me introduce the first speaker. So the first speaker is Joanna Regulska. So Joanna is the Vice Provost and the Dean of the Global Affairs at the University of California, Davis. She has led large-scale programs that transform institutions, establish partnerships, and substantially improve global service for over 30 years. So, Joanna, please.
Thank you so much, Lauren, and thank you to the organizers for inviting me. Warm welcome to everybody. Good morning, afternoon, evening, depending on where you are in the world and from where you're joining us. I do serve at UC Davis, heading our Global Affairs Office, which sort of is a hub for international activities. Of course, a lot of international engagement activities, partnerships are really happening at the level of colleges and schools, because they are driven very much by faculty and responding to needs of our students. So for those of you who might not be familiar with the UC system, we are one of the 10 campuses, and I know that my colleagues already has been presenting. But it is important maybe to underscore that as a comprehensive university, and in fact, the most comprehensive on the West Coast, because we are one of the only 5 universities in the country, that public university that has this breadth of expertise across the human health, animal health, agriculture, and environment. We are very much committed to environment locally and globally, but also to diversity and internationalization. We are ranked #1 in the United States, in second time in the QS ranking. So that's those few things, and there are many others, really frame our philosophy in terms of international engagement, and what we believe that it's important, but also what we think on the ground we can achieve. I wanted to step back maybe for a second and think more broadly what is happening around the world, because I think those shifts and changes right now really frame how the research community will function, how, no question, the functioning of the research community has tremendously changed because of the pandemic. So the first element will be obviously these incredible inequities around the world that are emerging. And they are setting the tone for overall research mobility. The inequities in terms of large and public and small institutions, comprehensive versus those which are more sort of liberal arts colleges. Digital divide is no question widening. So on one hand, we are obviously gaining tremendously because we are participating in this digital world, but the divide is widening, and that will shape with whom and how we collaborate. And I think also more pronounced as social, racial, and gender and economic inequalities. Those who have and those who do not have access. I think the tragic toll across the world have really affected academic community tremendously. If we think about what is happening in academic institutions in India and in other parts of the world, it's what's happening to our students, to the parents who has financial means and not. That will affect down the road and is affecting already now. And then I think the another element is the sort of differentiated value of humanities and social sciences versus the STEM fields. So what did that means in terms of our collaboration? Another important aspect is that we need to really, the pandemic has shown us that we need to employ the interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary approaches, because none of the single disciplines offer solutions. So climate change, poverty, migration, health dynamic, we all need to think together and structure our collaborative projects, develop partnerships, engage faculty and students in a way that different points of view are very much represented. And that's questions, for example, Are the institutional partnerships really the one that are addressing our needs? Do they limit what each institution can offer? Should we really think more intentionally about different forms of collaboration and partnerships and what that means for the mobility of our communities? The pandemic also has really influenced the way we're thinking about the local and global challenges and how much they are really interconnected. And I think here the UN Sustainable Development Goals framework really provides us with a great way to think about both the collaborative, cross-disciplinary, cross-cultural, cross-national learning opportunities for students, but also for the collaboration. And finally, I think the pandemic has really reinforce the notion that the academic partnerships cannot be only limited to the academic institutions. I think we need to partner with our communities, with our NGOs surrounding us, with our business, industry, and so forth. So in that sense, then mobility is also getting expanded because we have different actors and different partners with whom we are working. So there's no doubt that the shift right now around the mobility, around the academic partnerships is really amplifying certain barriers that we have in the past and then exist now. And those barriers range from gender and family context to socioeconomic context to academic context, as I've pointed out. At UC Davis, we intentionally aim to engage, support, and recognize the faculty and students' global engagement. And that is done in a number of different ways. It could range from intentionally including faculty, for example, in international visits and trips and agreements. And of course, now it's all helping virtually. But there's always a champion to a particular initiative. And I think that's very important because the bottom line is that it's faculty who are really driving those engagements. We do offer seed grants to support mobility in faculty. We recognize global engagement. We have a Chancellor's Awards that we every year we are offering to faculty and students and staff. But we also have a whole program of Global Aggies and really to celebrate and showing the impact of our faculty and students. Maybe another good example will be our partnership right now that we've created on the campus between Office of Sustainability, Diversity, Equity and Inclusion, and Global Affairs, because it actually underscores and underlines our commitment to environmental, racial, and social justice. And numbers of projects that we are engaged in are really bringing these three elements in. So supporting the mobility of our faculty, the grants, the participation in conferences, all of this is driven by that kind of a tripod of these units and then commitment more philosophically to where we see our institutions. And finally, maybe one example that we strongly believe in our students because that's the future. So we did, like many institutions, secure grants for programs, virtual programs. So a faculty member in plant sciences connected her students in her plant biochemistry course to students in a traditional medicine course in Shanghai Jiaotang University in China. And then designed a module to have students from both classes think together in teams to create the e-posters, which are really explaining the solutions to have challenges. And of course, those are connected with sustainable development goals. And in another examples, our students, we have a student farm, and our students created a consortium of student farming around the world project, which is virtually bringing together students, farmers, and researchers from US, from Morocco, from Brazil, and Chile, in a wide-ranging fields of soil health, plant sciences, agriculture, and environmental science. So it's connecting SDG, the zero hunger, but also poverty and numbers of others. So I will leave at that. I look forward to further conversation, but I think this is an exciting moment for understanding mobility, expanding, and yet we need to think also about the challenges that we all face. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Joanna. So our second speaker is Alain Bousquerolles from France. So Alain is a research director and a professor at the University of Lille. His research includes the control and energy management of various electrified vehicles, from car to trains. So please, Alain.
Thanks, Laurent, and thanks to the organizer for inviting me at this conference. Maybe Cathy can share my slide. Okay, thanks. So I will share with you the experience of University of Lille on what is called CUMEN, Campus of University, with mobility based on innovation and carbon neutrality. Next slide, please. So it's focused on one of the campus of University of Lille, one of the 3 campuses. It's a campus that receives every day more than 20,000 users, students and academic staff. Next slide. And we do a carbon assessment in 2010 and 2015. And in 2010, the first surprise that the mobility of user was the main contributor to greenhouse gases. And then in 2015, we focus on the mobility, specifically the professional trips and the commuting trips. And the second surprise was that, unfortunately, the main contributor was the commuting trip with more than 95%. And the professional trips, transatlantic trips, for example, and so was not so huge. We do in-depth analysis. Globally, 1/3 of the user come by thermal cart, 1/3 by subway, and 1/3 by buses. And unfortunately, the people that come by car leads to most important greenhouse gases emission. Is the pink part in the figure. Next slide. So we develop the CUMEN program in order to reduce significantly the CO2 equivalent emission of the University of Lille by trying to move from a thermal vehicle commuting trips to electric vehicles commuting trips, and also to propose a charging station using renewable energy for the user. So we developed the idea to have a living lab of on electromobility, because finally our university is a small city. So we have several phases, but I will not spare time on that. Next slide, please. So what could be the future campus? You can see just an example to give you an idea. It could be the green area, the center of the campus, without the possibility to come in with thermal cars, the possibility to have a charging station connected to PV panel and so on for electrical cars, and low emission smart mobility inside with autonomous bus, Segway, and so on, sharing car services and so on. Next slide. So in order to propose the campus, we start with 2 projects on technical project on its EVE on electric vehicle consumption and Greta on renewable energy capacity of the campus. And progressively, we have more and more project on the societal aspects, the acceptance of the users, the economical models, and so on. And we have more and more projects with a lot of partners in order to propose this new campus. Next slide, please. So to do that, we have a strong interdisciplinary team. First, we start with two technical laboratory and one social and human science laboratory. Then the city of Lille joined us. That is also of interest because the city of Lille would like to know our experience in order also to extend in the city some aspects. We develop also an international lab with the Canada, University of Trois-Rivières, in order to compare the usage and the possibility in terms of electromobility of a European campus and a North American campus. We have a strong connection with Rochester Institute of Technology in US on the economics and public policy aspects, and also University of Ghent in Belgium. Next slide. So, of course, the pandemic has changed a lot the usage. What could be the future is really a question. We take the opportunity of the lockdown in France to do a survey in a very small team. My team is 21 people. In the past, we have calculated the commuting of the team. And during the lockdown, of course, we use a lot of video conference tool and so on. We try to compute the energy consumption due to that tools and that teleworking way to do. And we extend that on 1 year in order to compare. Of course, using a pure teleworking work is reducing a lot, finally, the commuting greenhouse gases. But when we compare to teleworking with, for example, commuting only with subway is better than teleworking. That means that teleworking is not only the solution. Of course, there will be a mix, but what could be the future is to mix in the best way the different possibility. And of course, we need to exchange face-to-face with people. Thanks for your attention.
Okay, thank you very much, Alain. So our third speaker is Ratan Lal. So Ratan is a director and a distinguished professor to the Center of Carbon Management and Sequestration at the Ohio State University. His research covers soil carbon sequestration, climate change, soil degradation, soil health, and more. So please, Ratan.
Thank you, Lauren. Thank you for the invitation to the organizers. That's very kind of you. June 1, 2015, the French Minister of Agriculture and Forestry, Mr. Stéphane Le Foll, and his entourage, about 10 people together, visited our center to discuss the 4 per mil, 0.4% carbon sequestration in soils of the world. I presented to him a copy of this book, The Potential of US Cropland for Carbon Sequestration. It was published in 1997. We also published a similar book for potential of US grazing land, forest land, and policy implications as well. So I salute Mr. Le Foll for internationalizing soil carbon sequestration as a project to mitigate and adapt to climate change. We need those kind of policy. I would like to make 2 statements as a result of that. Number 1 is called One Health concept. And the One Health concept states the health of soil, plants, animal, people, ecosystem, and planetary processes is one and indivisible. That's very important. Yes, health of environment and human is interconnected, but it's the entire system, health of soil, plants, animal, people, ecosystem, and planetary processes are one and indivisible. That's a very important concept to understand. And the second part I'd like to mention is the carbon neutrality. Yes, industry such as Monsanto, John Deere, Alice Chalmers, Fiat, Alice, whatever, yes, they should achieve neutrality. as far as agriculture is concerned, it has to be emission negative farming. For example, if we put in 1,000 kilogram of carbon in farm operation per hectare to grow corn, soybean rotation in the Midwest United States, to simply offset 1,000 kilogram by producing 1,000 kilogram is not good enough. We must produce 10 times more. That is negative emission farming. And that's a very important part. That brings me to the third part. How much carbon can we put back in the soil and the ecosystem of the world? Agricultural soils of the world have lost about 135 gigaton of carbon. We can put that, at least that much back, probably more. Why more? 135 is only organic carbon. There is also inorganic carbon in arid and semi-arid climate. That's a little different process of sequestration, but it's a very important part. Globally, since Industrial Revolution, 1750 circa, about 555 gigaton of carbon have been emitted, of which 235 gigaton came from soil and land use change. So over a period of about 80 years between 2020 and 2100, our estimate is that we can put carbon in the biomass, that the woodland forest, about 155 gigaton over 8-year period. We can put carbon back in soil, such as the French Caterpillar Mill program, 178 gigaton. Together in the terrestrial biosphere, we can put 333 gigaton of carbon through better policy and prudent governance, which translates into carbon dioxide drawdown of 157 parts per million of CO2. That means if we can find no carbon fuel sources soon, like 2030 or soon thereafter, and we implement the terrestrial carbon sequestration program globally as agreed upon in the COP21 in Paris, yes, climate change, warming to less than 2 degrees centigrade is still possible. But that implementation has to happen. Now, while we sequester carbon in soil, I mentioned soil health. Soil organic carbon content is very critical. In the good soil, cropland soils and agricultural soil, carbon concentration, organic carbon, should be about 2% by weight in the root zone, in the top 20 to 30 centimeter. Most soils of the developing countries, which have 1 billion small landholders, many of them women, probably 70% of them, in sub-Saharan Africa, South Asia, Caribbeans, in the Andean regions, Central America and elsewhere, the carbon concentration is depleted because of the extractive farming practices. It can be as low as 0.5%. I know of many soils in sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia, 0.1%. Consequently, even if you apply fertilizers, they are not effective. If you apply irrigation, that's not effective because the nutrient and water utilization efficiency is compromised. Therefore, to implement policies that we are talking about, where soil and land and others can become a strategy, a tool to offset anthropogenic emission, society must be willing to compensate farmers for the ecosystem services generated through improving soil health. The question is how much? We did have a Chicago Climate Exchange market started in about 2000. The price of the carbon was $1 per ton of CO2. It went up to about $6 per ton of CO2 by 2005-06, and then collapsed to 20 cents a ton. Why collapse? Because we had no treaty to cap the emission. California, UC Davis, maybe that's a very relevant example being implemented, but nationally it was not. Consequently, So what I'm trying to say is that the demand supply based market driven cost of carbon sequestration compensation is not good enough. Even $6 per ton is nothing. Carbon sequestration in the geologic strata, we have re-implemented in the recent government, $50 per ton. Why not farmer also get compensated $50 per ton? What the difference between carbon dioxide drawn from the injection into this strata and that by the plants and trees? But it should be at least $120 ton. That means if farmers sequester half a ton of carbon per hectare, they should be compensated $60. That is societal value. That is the payment for ecosystem services. And that requires policy implementation nationally and globally. Nationally, I'm very glad right now in the US Senate, a program called, an act called Growing Climate Solution Act. And they're talking about compensating farmers for carbon sequestration. And perhaps in the Farm Bill in 2023 or so, it might be included. University-wise, I was very glad to see the University of Yale, the discussion. Ohio State University indeed has 1,500 hectares of farmland throughout Ohio. Our campus area is about 700 hectares. So if we have 600 buildings. So if each of these buildings have a water meter, gas meter, electric meter, we come baseline and try to save energy, 5%, 10%, 20% sequence. Green roof, I could show you just outside my window. We have an example of a teaching example of green roof structure, 600 building having green roofs in one way or the other could be tremendous opportunity. So carbon sequestration, valuing carbon, not undervaluing the resource, paying land manager and farmer a fair and just price, and translating science into action through policy as well as education is a way to go. So I hope cattle per male program, although it's an aspiration goal, sometime it cannot be realized, it is too much, but even 0.1% is a good start. So I really appreciate that program, and I strongly support that it be implemented globally. Although it has been 6 years ago that was declared, global implementation has not yet happened. It should. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So our last speaker is Nicolas Gracieux. Nicolas is a research director for the French National Research Institute of Sustainable Development, ERD. So please, Nicolas.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm very happy to be in this session about mobility. As you can hear, my English is not that great, but I'd like to challenge your French. So if I ask you the question, où atterrir? Où atterrir? Can you understand? Where to land? In March 2020, during the first lockdown pandemic in France, Bruno Latour, which is a philosopher and anthropologist, asked us the question, where do we wish to land as a society during the 21st century? And during this very specific time, out of time, we decided with colleagues to design and launch a new serious game. I will give you a little more later on. But let's go back to the word land. Land is a very paradoxal word because land for mobility is linked to huge emission of carbons because of airplane. I take a plane, I land in a city, I go for a meeting, for a conference, or I go for capacity building. Huge emission. In the same time, land as a land surface is a very thin layer just around the globe where humanity is growing up on life. This is what some scientists call the critical zone. And it's really interesting to get in a single word this kind of contradiction. This contradiction, you also have it at individual scale. If you think about me, now I'm in Grenoble in France. If I wish to go to the conference in Washington by plane, I should emit like 2 tons of greenhouse gases just by the plane. And actually 2 tons is around the target we've got for 2050 in terms of equality of emission for each inhabitant in the world, not just for traveling, for food, for education, for health, etc. So the whole annual budget in a single flight. We can see the contradiction very clearly. In the lab where I'm working, we are 250 people, and we made the budget, carbon budget. The impact of flights is like 60% of the global budget. And among this 60%, it makes a means of 4 tons per capita, which means 2 times your budget for a full annual year for food security, health, etc. So we can see it's a large issue we have to deal with. And now that we have the fact, how do we act? This is a question. And I like to tell you a story. When I was young, I was making gymnastics. And the first time you want to make a backflip in competition, for example, first you have to train your brain, you have to train your body, you have to practice, you have to get some helps, and then you can do it in the real life. And this is exactly the same thing for big problem or big issues that we have. So this is why we decided to launch a serious game called Matter en 180 minutes, 3 hours for the Earth. I will copy paste the link later on. To simulate the real life, but not to get so much risk as in real life. We simulate virtual groups of research. Up to now, we've been playing 300 people. And the good news is that in the virtual world, we are able to decrease up to 45% in the framework of scientific activities and in this game. We've got thousands of alternatives proposed by players, and these can be gathered in 10 most efficient alternatives. The first one that cover about 37% is video communication, as we are doing right now. But the second one is collaboration between people. I can collaborate with somebody in the other part of the world for making field trip, etc., etc. And I think it's a really interesting initiative. So if you are interested on it, I just copy paste here the link. If you are French speaking, I have good news for you. We will make a massive session of this serious game next week, and I invite you to participate. This is the best way to create complex scenarios of reduction. If you are English speaking, I have a good and bad news. The bad news is that it's not yet possible for the massive session, but we just translate all the documents. And I guess I will be very happy as part of the symposium on real and practical activities to get the opportunity to test this English version with some of you, the most interested, and see later on how we can spread the initiative in the English-speaking world. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you, Nicolas. So first, I'd like to thank all the speakers for their talks. So just maybe in order to start the discussion, so as we can see that the solution for the problem induced by the pandemic to the mobility is not unique, and the solution is not unique. So it's possible, in fact, to use different means in order to try to change our habits. So maybe I can start with a quite, how can I say, question, a very broad question. So do you think that the scientific community is now ready to change its habits concerning the mobility? So. Who wants to?
I'll start. Maybe I'll start with the fact that travel gonna be and will continue to be important for our community. There's no question, because face-to-face contacts are really important. Often you cannot conduct experiments virtually. Maybe eventually we'll have the robots that will conduct the experiments for us somewhere else. That's for sure gonna happen at some point, but right now I think human contact is critical. But I also want us to be careful of focusing on travel within the academic community without really thinking where carbon is also produced, because we are actually not the biggest offenders in it. The global aviation related to, in general, global aviation is only 2% of the actual carbon emission. Electricity, heat production, industry, even agriculture, forestry, and land use, right? There are far bigger and greater offenders. So I think it is a question that we face as an academic community, how we can contribute to lowering the footprint. But I would be careful to saying we have to completely eliminate the travel. I think what we need to do is to work with other partners and actually comprehensively lowering down the carbon footprint. Because if we look at how the universities are, and I can look at UC Davis, is it really the travel, or is it actually the heat that we're losing? And if you go on the campus right now, you'll see that the campus is basically excavation, because we're changing all the pipes and the heating system. Because we see that this is actually one of our greatest contributor. So anyway, I want us to be careful how we focus on travel versus other ways that we can actually address the problem that we're facing.
I agree.
So take the floor, and I totally agree with Joanna that we have to be careful about what we can analyze and what will replace the travel and so on. It's not so clear, and sometimes it's very confusing to have the right response. For the question of Laurent, what I can say that in theory, our scientific community is ready. In practice, not so much. But what is most important from my point of view is we can see that our students are very motivated to change the world, are strongly involved in what we can propose in action. And as they will be the future scientists, I am confident in the fact that we will go in the right way. Thanks.
Just to complete what said Joanna and Alain, I think the most important when you want to get some impacts is to think locally and in very functional groups. I mean, you know where are your carbon budget locally. It's really important to think about this. For instance, in the lab where I'm working, we know that the flight and basically mobilities is a big part, like 60%, except purchase. So we know that in our specific environment, it's an important way to deal with. But in other parts or for other reasons, for sure, food could be more important and so on. So if I have just one advice or recommendation to say is, be careful with the mondial numbers that can hide basically what is your reality. And we also know that the change will come from the small place to the global place as a viral evolution. So the more you change locally, the best it is.
Thank you. So thank you. What, Ratha?
Yeah, can I make just a couple?
Yeah.
I actually support and I agree what Professor Regulska mentioned. I would like to say that the energy use in urban center buildings should really be looked at very, adjusting thermostat by 5 degrees can make a big difference. And that's one part that should be considered. Food waste, I'm really, really concerned that globally 30 to 40% of food is wasted. 1.2 billion tons out of 3.2 billion tons of grains produced do not reach any stomach. They're taken to landfills one way or the other, where they are a real big liability. So I think the question is how to reconcile the need to produce more and nutritious food with the absolute necessity of improving the environment. It's not either or, it's both together. And the science exists to do that, translating that science into action so that agriculture is a solution, not a problem. Should be the goal.
Okay, thanks. So actually in France, we have a very special group called the Laboratoire 1.5, dedicated, the aim of this group is to help the labs to try to do to estimate the carbon footprint, so including mobility, purchase, and so on. So I wanted to know if on the other side of the Atlantic, so in US, do you have the same the same initiative?
Do you mean the initiatives at the institutional level, or?
In fact, the lab is not institutional. It's a group of researchers, and they are dedicated to the carbon footprint.
Well, there are many. I would say, you know, every institution has all kind of initiatives that relates one way or the other. Davis, for example, is a bicycle-friendly city, so as a result of that, we have wide range of, you know, initiatives related to green transportation using the bicycles and so forth. So I think the you know, there's a numbers of global climate. The UC system and UC Davis has a Global Climate Leadership Council, and there are numbers of initiatives stemming out from there, ranging from energy efficiency to renewable energy to dining and food and health and waste and so forth. So I think every institution is actually trying to generate numerous of initiatives. And I think Nicola's point is very important, that it's really relevant to where you are located and what is your culture, what are your practices, who you are. You know, commuting might be relevant, certainly it's relevant to UC Davis, but not might be so much relevant to the others, right? So I think there's a wide range of responses, and I think that's what it's important. There is no one model fitting all, but rather the recognition of diversity of factors that are contributing, and that will affect the change in behaviors.
Yes. So we have questions from the audience. So the first question is, do you think technological advances and more research will improve the quality of water resources and improving climate change and environmental situations? In most of the talks, we don't tackle the real problems of the increase in human population. Who wants to answer?
Maybe I can begin. We are 7.8 billion now, and estimates vary that there may be 9.8 billion by 2050, another 2 billion people coming to dinner, so to say, and maybe 11 billion by 2100. However, let's take the positive attitude. If there is an education, especially of the women in developing countries, the population can still be controlled to less than 10 billion by the end of the century. Education is the key part, and that should be promoted. And I think with promoting agriculture, promoting education for the women especially, which is not as good as it should be improved tremendously in all countries, especially in developing countries. That is the solution to population. Empowering women so that they have control on their own destiny through education and through giving them the resources needed. I think that's a very critical part. I have seen some study that lowering the fertility rate, for example, in developing countries, can make a big difference rather than population keep going beyond 2050. In fact, I've seen with education how the curve can begin to go down after 2050. So right now, the focus should really be in empowering women and educating them and providing them resources to have control on their own destiny.
I think maybe just following on Professor Lala, the pandemic is really creating very new challenges, or maybe amplifying some old challenges, because it's going to be the access to education for girls, the financial and the economic strain that pandemic has put on many countries means that the tendency will be that the boys going to continue to go and achieve education, and the girls going to be working more and more, and they will be denied the education. So the danger is that we are actually going to move backwards rather than forward because of the economic strains. And we need to also remember that the access is going to be denied for many because parents has passed away, and there will be no financial means for many to actually access the education. So we have new challenges in terms of the gender equity, in terms of the gender accessibility toward the education. It's going to be all over the world. I don't think so that, maybe some very rich countries will not be affected, but certainly in the United States, we're going to see the communities that the issue of access is going to be tremendously affected.
Yeah, maybe I would like to react because I think it's a very good moment to discuss about the donut. Maybe you know about it, the donut of cat rowers and collaborators. The idea is that basically, if you look to all countries in the world, you can try to find an ideal place where you have both social justice and access to food, water, education for anybody, and respect the Earth's planetary boundaries. And in this work, if you look about this, unfortunately, none of the countries are able to do so. But finally, the countries that have the biggest footprint are not the one where we have the high demographic boom. These are the oldest countries like France, US, and so on. So I really believe that we have to find a balance where, in our hand, already developed countries drastically find a way to change their way of living their life and reduce their consumption, and in another way, for the lowest country, get the opportunity to develop in terms of well-being and the essential needs. And here we can go to the best place between social justice and planet's boundaries.
Okay, so I will complete the response from the previous speaker because it shows that we go in the right way. First, I believe that technology could be just a part of the solution, of course. And as we said previously, Joanna and Nicola, first we have to do the right analysis locally in order to know what could be the driver, what could be the change. And I would like also to highlight what's said by Professor Lal. What is important is education. If you don't aware people, if you don't involve people in the change, we cannot change very fastly. That's why at the moment in the world there is many action called Living Labs that is developing in order to have constructive action and also to involve people in the change. I believe it's education and awareness is also a key part of the response. And finally, also economics. If you develop a new idea, a new product that is too expensive, of course, there is no interest. So it's globally a sustainable development thinking. You have to work together with all the parts in order to do the right progress, if I can say that.
Yeah, I agree. So sustainable development is systemic. We need a systemic view to try to solve the problem. So another question from the audience. So we've increased innovation in research methods that take into account remote and or limited field research. Do any of you have lessons learned during the last 15 months that your institution will sustain permanently? Some example? No?
Maybe I can begin.
Thanks.
Professor Regulska mentioned that travel of the academician because of the COVID has some adverse impact. I agree with that. We do need face-to-face interaction among scientific community. But I must also indicate that what we are doing right now through Zoom link and other virtual meetings, it has been helpful. We have been able to communicate. I personally, since 15 months, I have kept record. I have participated in 160 webinars like we are doing today. Would that have been possible by physical travel? No. So I think there are certain things, lesson we must learn. The lesson is perhaps focus on distant education, focus on webinars, focus on virtual meetings and conference, even education classes. Yes, laboratories have to be in person, but I think we have to think through again, what are the positive things out of this dark period? And I think distant learning and virtual meetings has increased our interaction to some extent, and which has been positive, and we should develop on that.
So we've done a research among our students to asking them, because they are the next generation. So asking them, what is it that they need the most? And we done this research right at the beginning of the pandemic. So it was last April, May. And given that we cannot travel. And students responded overwhelmingly saying, we want to focus on professional development. We want to learn more professional skills like digital literacy and engaging professional networking and so forth, because we know that we're going to actually engage personally and we're going to travel down the world. So we want to use this time in order to prepare ourselves. And then many of them, indeed, we created a lot of internships and virtual internships and engaging them over the summer, and we continue to do so. So I think for the younger generation, this was a period that they managed to get exactly what Professor Laura said, to many different internships at the same time, because they could do something in Rwanda in the morning and in afternoon, they could be involved in Sacramento locally. But ultimately, younger generation needs that face-to-face contact. We have it. We build up our networks. They are building the networks, but they also are eager to go and embed themselves in a different culture, live somewhere else, engage with others. So I think that it's going to have to be a balance between what we can virtually offer versus what actually a physical presence in another place allows you to learn and experience, which virtual world will not give us.
Yeah, I think thinking about do we need or not physical interaction is probably a white or black vision of the world And my vision during my own experience, and as I was reporting where to learn from Bruno Latour, Où atterrir, is that basically I believe that we need some social interaction for sure, and this can be in very close circles somehow. And we can get like this extraordinary seminar today without moving, which is a good way to start thinking together what can be efficient activities. And just to tell you a nice story, as Lal told us about the 160 conference he did during the period, when we start developing the serious game, it was first for physical game. Maybe you cannot see, but we start making the things for the game. And there was a lockdown, and because of the lockdown, we did everything by remote way. And because of this, we were able to, what was really surprising is that we were able to develop it with colleagues from other places in the world, in the France I never met physically. And we start to get a nice and friendly relationship. But more than this, it gave opportunity for us to give you the opportunity to play the game in Washington or everywhere after that. So I think we have to manage to take the best from both virtual and physical worlds.
Yes, I totally agree that we have to find the right trade-off, but what is the right trade-off is very complex, in fact. And in terms of energy consumption, because we are focusing on energy consumption in my lab, during the pandemic, we do a survey on what is the consumption of people using teleworking. It's a nightmare to have the right figure because at the moment it's very changing. But finally, what we find is that in our panel, there are some people that have a more energy consumption in teleworking than in coming in presence, unfortunately, because the subway in France with a nuclear plant leads to a very low greenhouse gases emission. And finally, when we discuss with people consider that all the energy with the smartphone video conference is zero. But we have also to teach people that any action leads to climate change factor and so on.
Okay, thank you. So, in my opinion, in fact, there's for educations we have two different things. So the first one is the knowledge, and the second is the skills. The skill, effectively, for the knowledge, I think it's possible to have a virtual means in order to improve the knowledge. But I think for the skills, we need a face-to-face period between the teacher and the student. So I think that's why, in fact, it's not possible to do everything in a virtual mode. So maybe because we are very close to the end, so maybe I can ask you each of you what in your mind, what is the next key points to solve in order to go further in the domain?
Maybe I can make a small comment. 7.8 billion of us right now. Each one of us is a culprit and a victim, both of the climate change and environmental degradation. And each one of us must take responsibility. Even a small incremental improvement multiplied by 7.8 billion can make a big difference. And lowering carbon footprint of personal lifestyle, even by 5% and 10% in the Western societies, can make a huge difference. And I think this is where the personal responsibility and commitment is very critical.
No, I can go. So I agree absolutely with Professor Laurent that the personal responsibility will be critical because it's going to take each of one on this planet to change something in our behavior. But I also think that there is also a collective responsibility. And that's where the institutional responsibility comes, or organizational responsibility of whichever part of the community we are in, because our actions have to be intentional. There is no more room for just accidental behaviors. We have to be far more intentional in what we commit ourselves to, what our priorities are. For me, certainly issue of access and equity is extremely important, because these divisions about which I've talked will continue to divide us and not always bring us together.
I can pursue. To my opinion, the academic world has a really important place to play, because we have this capacity to make research on topics and to readjust the topic we want to study. And I guess that this is a very interesting thing that most of the workers in the world can't do. I mean, for such a global transition we have to do, we need to take time to organize things, to find new solutions, to check locally what is the complexity and extract the best scenarios for each local situation. And academic world has this opportunity to put some reflection and thinking about this, what is not obvious for many other economics fields, where indicators are very short visions in time. So I think we have a huge responsibility for this point of view.
I will continue what said by Nicolas. I believe that, of course, education and training of students is a key point, and how to train and involve them in local action, because in fact, they will be the actor of tomorrow. So it's important. The university has a key role on that aspect, I believe. And moreover, there is some recent papers that show that a university can be a small city and so on. And it's easier to change in university, in our university, than a city, because the constraints are lighter, in fact, and could be really a demonstrator. And I believe that we have to go that in an interdisciplinary way, because of course we have to mix the competencies to do that, and to demonstrate to the real world that is possible to change.
Right, exactly. So effectively, so I think that in our universities, we are building more than students, but we are building citizens for the future, and it's very important to show them and to share with them the good way to do. So we are close to the end. So once again, I'd like, before to close this session, I'd like to thank all the speakers for their contribution, and I will hope that this debate has been fruitful for the audience. So thank you very much, all of you.
Very much.
Thank you, Laurent, and thank you to all of our moderators and panelists for the engaging discussions today. As we progress through this event, we're really building a body of themes and insights that will ground this community moving forward. As Michelle shared in the beginning of the day, we're in the middle of a once-in-a-century moment. Not since 1919 have such a constellation of forces all converged in this matter. And in the midst of the deep challenges that we're facing globally, we're also really learning in real time, and all of your remarks have really brought that into the forefront. We're challenging individuals and institutions, not just to bounce back to where we were, but to embrace what we didn't know might even be possible. So please consider joining us as we build a collaborative community to sustain this work. We'll share more details about this effort and concrete next steps tomorrow. In the meantime, if you want to learn more, please reach out to our Membership and Strategic Partnerships Manager, Alyssa Angelito, for more information.